Chapter 8. The Truth. As dusk was starting to settle, the cave shined bright in the night sky. Time had passed us by, transporting our trifecta into a massive lull. All of us had fallen transfixed with comfort. No longer were the days when we had to sprint for our lives and bleed for shelter. We were safe, and it was a strange feeling. Our day was coming to a close as we had something to look forward to. A chance. A chance that may have been gift-wrapped in treachery, but bow-tied in hope. Hope that swelled in our brains as the minutes ached into hours. Wheezing through his boisterous nozzle, the beast snored on the floor, fast asleep and calm. Ironically, Gregory appeared frustrated with the sound, and would occasionally nudge the animal until it stopped. If only I had the courage to do the same to him. Finding a quiet place to sleep was scarce. Now my issue just doubled. It wasn't a problem for long, though, as the irritating snorts bled into the island's immutable ambiance. Bats squeaking, monsters grumbling, and Gregory talking. One would think I'd be sitting outside the gates of hell. In truth, I wouldn't have it any other way. Greg seemed chipper as ever as he poked and preserved the fire, lumbering away, creating a furnace that commanded smoke, fumes that spouted like a chimney, poisoning the air above us. But even as the smog clogged our lungs, we couldn't help but smile. "Are you looking forward to our trek?" he asked. And just like that, my smile vanished. "I'm not trying to think about it," I replied, sharing some honesty. "How could you not think about it? It's incredibly important. We should focus on it," he grumbled. To tell you the truth, the simple thought of it terrorized me, eliciting a plummeting sensation in my stomach leading to a daze of nausea. Fortunately, there was nothing for me to throw up. A gift I did not wish I possessed. Call me a coward all you want, but how could I not be horrified? Imagine your entire world hinged on an impossible feat. You, like any sane person, would avoid confronting that feat at all cost. The island ripped the last threads of sanity from my skull and left me to die. I had to do the insane to live, which is not a sentence anyone ever wants to say. Besides, I wasn't allowed to just fold my cards and quit, especially when I have a friend screaming at me in my face to go all in. I don't know, man. I'm not looking forward to falling and dying. It seems kind of hopeless, don't you think? "Oh, how quickly you forget. Don't you forget me saying I could get us to the top of that mountain?" "I've climbed Yes, you've climbed thousands of them before. It will be a cakewalk. I get it. I just don't have as much faith in my abilities as you." A bolt of energy sprang from Gregory as he reached out his hand. "Brilliant, Walter. That's exactly what we need. Faith will guide us on our journey. Yeah, take my hand. Let's pray." Part of me wanted to just get it over with to keep him happy. Deep down, though, that would have crushed me. "Oh, no thanks. I'm not religious," I informed him. The man was floored, completely taken with my words. From the looks on his face, it was as if I just told him I killed puppies in my free time. "How can you ignore the scriptures? How could anyone live with something so crucial in their lives just take it away? I could never, and I mean never, go a day without talking to our God. Well, my God." "It's as if we're different people. Imagine that," I said as he maintained his befuddled mug. It humored me to see someone so lost and confused. "You must live such a woeful life, Walter. I'm so sorry. Without faith, I can't imagine anyone being pleased. As if your entire soul is stunted. Like a flower without sunlight, you could never grow." "Well, I never liked the sun, so that's for the best," I joked. He wasn't having it, though. He pressed on. "I have a novel idea, my friend. What if I tried to convert you? On the spot, right now," he offered. "I'd say you'd be wasting your time. Religion and I don't mesh well. There's no string of words in the dictionary that will change that fact." My warning was rebuffed as his little sales pitch began, offering a lifetime contract to a man who was making sales for a living. I feared he'd bitten off more than he could chew. I listened as Gregory attempted to not choke on the fat slab of steak he chomped into. Let's say you are age 80. Life is long behind you and time has worn you down to your core as a person. You now have a choice. You can take the easy route and be whatever you are now. Let's call them the blinded. The blinded fall prey to the Grim Reaper, so to speak. Their entire future and present revolve around death. A terrible situation, yes? As if his question had a right or wrong answer. Another slight in my book. Rhetorical questions are for people who are too dense to get their point across. It's simply a lazy tactic. I've grown to hate it, too. Just like Gregory's petty argument. Nevertheless, it intrigued me, so I nodded, prolonging my late-night entertainment. Now, suppose you are a believer, a follower of Christ, the scriptures, all of it. Now the Reaper loses its power over you. At the ripe age of 80, you are now on the cusp of a wonderful adventure. One that may begin with death, but a great journey that will never end. The afterlife awaits all of us, but only if we choose to go there. Why not just choose the path, even if it's not possible? Why take the risk? It was a valid point, not one I haven't heard before, though. I give it a solid B-, although to be fair, I'm a tough grader. So the entire basis of choosing a religion hinges on judgment, and perhaps getting into heaven, based on one guy's opinion of you, no one else. A tyrant who gets to do and say whatever he wants with no repercussions. That place already exists, my friend. It's called North Korea. I have no intention of ever visiting, and I'm not going to waste my Sunday mornings waiting for a one-way ticket. Now, I may hate rhetorical questions, but boy do they work. You mock my God, and yet here you are, a prime beneficiary of his will. This is the God that saved us from a hurricane, a band of monsters, and has kept us alive on this barren and dangerous island. A speck of gratitude should be in order, not a growing disbelief. If you still doubt God's existence, despite all the gifts and miracles he has provided us, then that is a shame. Besides, if you don't praise him or any other God, then who do you praise? He asked. He was genuinely curious. No longer preserving the same judgment he started his little onslaught with. You, I answered. Don't be preposterous, he scoffed. I'm not being preposterous in the slightest. You asked me to praise the man who saved me from a hurricane, saved me from almost being murdered by savages, and who has kept me alive for almost the entire time I've been on the island. That person would be you. Gregory was getting flustered. There's nothing more tongue-tying than cognitive dissonance. As a sales tactic that's rarely ever used but is deliciously effective. It's a simple strategy. First clamp onto another's once concrete ideations, then effectively split them in half. Once they are melting away in a puddle of disorientation, then you're rewarded with a prime opportunity to incept an olive branch of stability. For Gregory, the branch I was offering was a compliment. It's a difficult thing to reject, but Gregory was a rare breed. As a result, I was intrigued to see how he'd rationalize a disagreement. I could save you, Walter, because God has blessed me with the ability to save. I'm a conduit for his bidding, but it seems like he wants you alive. Why admonish that? He asked. Can I thank the man upstairs for torpedoing me into the ocean? On top of that, it seems like he's a fan of dicing and slicing my body, warping my mind and giving me a heart attack every other day. You can screw off. Gregory was doing his best to compress his displeasure with my last comment, but I could tell he was getting a tad miffed. They are lessons, Walt. Lessons that will teach you how to become a better version of yourself. Means to an end, and in the end, the means will be worth it. That's how the divine work, he corrected me. It seemed age did not elicit wisdom for the man. No worries, though. Back then, I was always willing to educate. Don't you see, Gregory? Those lessons come at a cost. Being on this island has cost us our bodies. Being starved has cost us our happiness. My father abandoning me cost me my sanity, and your son dying, well, I can't even conceptualize what the price tag for that could have been. I can assure you, though, whatever lessons that sprouts from murdering a young man aren't worth the price. I say stop being taught. Teach yourself and avoid being overbilled, I chattered, convinced that these words could change his life for the better. Alas, sometimes I can be quite the jerk. What grade do I give myself? F. Filled with hyperbolic and cheesy, unoriginal fluff. And most importantly, I failed to know my audience. Rushed and futile in its goal, and most of all, a regression to the old version of myself that couldn't hold on to his petty little urges. Using a corpse to win an argument is pretty fucking low. Even if that corpse is still paralyzed and hooked onto a machine. I can't describe what the cost was. The pain I'd felt. Days of sleep gone. My only child, my pride and joy gone. My wife, my rock, gone. If these losses were for nothing, then how can I even learn? I wouldn't be able to live, Walter. I need faith to become my rock. It has to be my stability, because without it, I have no one else. No one, he exclaimed, his voice fading while the realization took hold. For the record, it wasn't God who took my son from me. It was my stupidity, my recklessness that paralyzed him. Not a day goes by I don't think about it, that I don't realize and relive every gritty detail. Use logic and sense all you want, Walter, but if you take away my faith, then I'd be left with nothing else, he admitted. While I sat crushed for the man beside me, I was disappointed to see him proving my point. I can never understand how that when somebody achieves a great feat, it becomes a blessing from the heavens, but when they fuck up, then it's all their fault. People have to apologize for what they lack, despite the fact that they were given all their traits by their Savior himself. It's a concrete belief that takes away their virtues and stuffs them into a box labeled God's gifts. They're not something they earn, they're just that, gifts. People are asked to thank the heavens for these rewards, and yet they are still told to feel woeful whenever misfortune comes their way. To pray for an after-the-fact reprogramming from the man upstairs, long after his design was complete. Forget to apologize, and you'll spend an eternity swimming in hellfire. That's the offer Gregory was trying to sell me on. That was his glorious sales pitch. Now I could have voiced my disdain for the philosophy he clung to, or I could have pulled my wretched body out from the selfish, psychopathic hole I dug for myself. Fortunately, I did the latter. You know what, Gregory? Once we get home, you can teach me all about Christianity. You can take me to church, read me some passages, the whole shebang. I may not be a believer in the religion, like I said. I'm a believer in you. And if you say it helps, then that's more than enough reason to at least give it a shot, I said. It was an honest attempt to remedy his sobbing. I at least owed him that much. The man beamed up at me with drained eyes. I'll hold you to it, he bellowed, grinning from ear to ear as he went on to tell me the stories of Adam and Eve, David and Goliath, and likely hundreds of others I must have forgotten minutes after. It was a little distracting having to bite my lip at the giant list of contradictions and plot holes that the man's stories held. But to be fair, who am I to talk? For me, though, why did God wait thousands of years to put his son on the earth? Why skip out on sending your Savior during the most violent years in humanity's existence? Isn't that when people needed God the most? I cried. That's 3 questions, Walter, yawned Gregory. Fine, I'll knock it down to 1. Why did he have to wait? Because Rome wasn't built in a day, he smiled. And the world wasn't built in 6, I mumbled under my breath. Yes, it was, and on the 7th day he rested. Which is something we should be doing right now, he exclaimed. Yours like a bat. Our discussions tapered into twilight before the 2 of us could finally fall asleep. Hours of watch duty had left us ravaged and fatigued. This combination left us wickedly comatose for almost a dozen hours. Sweet sleep, shattered by a deafening screech that plucked us from our daze-induced cribs. A noise that made Gregory jolt into the air like a cat in an ice bath. Myself, well, I'd become rather conditioned to boisterous alarm clocks, so it didn't surprise me in the slightest. You brilliant beast, remarked Gregory as he marched out the cave, beaming like a drunken fool. You two have fun. I'm going to snooze for a bit, I yawned, crashing back into my stone mattress, unperturbed by whatever waited outside the cave. I'm not so sure there will be many leftovers waiting for you, bellowed Gregory. A rustling was taking place just outside the marsh, one I could no longer ignore. As I rose to the air, the sight that gifted me was glorious. In the creature's hand hung a fat, juicy bat, its body wrapped in vines and its neck craned into a fracture. Food, the beast offered, grateful to see the shining smile on my face. I'm not even going to question it, I blurted, rushing to our feast while the monster ripped his organs out piece by piece. There's no need to question it. It's clear the beast used a method us humans were too daft to even try. Tools. He wrapped the poor bastard in a lasso and pulled him into his chest, catching a meal like low-hanging fruit. Fresh meat, my friend. There's nothing like it, Gregory gushed. Quite a few assumptions were made there, but the monster, failing to even flinch while Gregory made his claims, likely confirmed at least some smears of truth. Have you ever eaten a bat before? I asked Gregory, while I looked on at the putrid surgery exploding below. I always try to eat everything on this fine earth, at least once in my life. Bats made their way off my list rather early, he gruffed as he peeled a thick carpet of hair off the mangled corpse. And? I asked, doing my best to clench my eyes from the vile exercise on the floor. Do you know how people say it tastes just like chicken? Well, it doesn't taste like chicken. It tastes awful. Luckily for us, starvation is the finest seasoning on the earth. It will make filet mignon look like dog food, he vowed. Alas, not much time passed before the piping meal was roasting atop a flame and into our hands. The three of us cheering, following a Gregory speech about brotherhood and trust, forced feeding himself the spotlight while the beast and I stood transfixed at the crisp skewers in our hands. Like Gregory predicted, the taste was beyond description. All my thoughts and troubles evaporated the second my tongue touched the charred and leathery skin, raging away at the army of bones and veins that shimmered inside the flesh. To me, they did not matter. I was blitzed on calories and high as a kite. The three of us were spoiled by the layers of meat that hung inside our prize. It was as if the animal was designed for mass consumption, a perfect pack of protein that pulsed inside our bodies, a much-needed pharmaceutical that healed our broken spirits. After my third or fourth helping of breakfast, I grew rather woozy. My stomach was feeling the afterburn of overstretching, and my conscience was teetering. Don't you feel a smidge guilty butchering and eating one of our housemates? I asked Gregory, as his face caked in slobber. Not in the slightest. Why should I? He gruffed through a mouthful of leg. Well, kidnapped by those snatchers. In a way, they saved me, I admitted. The creature then playfully slapped against my arm and frowned. If it wasn't for those bats and this little guy, I corrected myself. The monster's frown reverted into his ever-chuffed smirk. I reckon I had a hand in that too. Besides, if you think about it, the only food we have access to are the ones who seem to like you. I say we take advantage of their foolishness and try not to replicate it. Starvation can wait for our worlds plump with easy pickings, said Gregory. Fair enough, but if we get a reputation for eating our little helpers, then there won't be anybody left to help, I suggested, only making a counter-argument for counter-argument's sake. Survival of the fittest, slurred Gregory, picking loose skin from the gaps between his teeth. Ah, great quote by a great man. And what do you think old Mr. Darwin would have to say about our little abomination over here? I asked, glowing in the warmth of the jolly light that creature always seemed to emit. In response, Gregory cackled through the air, spitting the remains out from his pie-hole. He'd likely crap himself, he responded, giggling like a schoolgirl at his own joke. Well, that settles it. Looks like we found you a name, little fella, I crowed, patting the beast on its back. Darwin? Gregory asked. Darwin, I confirmed. Darwin, the monster exclaimed. Close enough, I approved, happy the old geezer could follow along. So what's next? I asked Gregory, eager to get the next tale in our journey over with before the big climb. The easiest obstacle we've faced yet. Rest, he answered. True to his word, that's exactly what we did for the next week, resting and refueling on the island's hidden bounty. It turned out the monster wasn't lying when he first offered flowers as a snack. The three of us indulged ourselves with treats and decadent delights, from the troubling taste of fungi to the tantalizing devouring of toads. Darwin had turned into quite the survival guide, pointing out and plucking any loose food he could find. Turned out some of the insects that carpeted the floors were wondrous sources of vitamins, and while we never dunked our heads into the mouth of an anthill, I'd be lying if I said we never slurped our tongues through the shells of snails. Darwin had knocked us clean off our throne of ignorance and planted us down onto his level. Gregory and I divulged into savages, thinking with the lens of a wild animal. No longer were we humans, we'd become bloodthirsty predators traveling in a pack. And while there's no honor in savagery, there is an honor in feasting like a king. And feast we did. Every night we cooked and cleaned our bounty of carcasses, capping our evenings off with Gregory's war stories. The man would paint illustrious pictures in our heads, and while they were likely besmirched with exaggerations, I never had the energy to care. They were like dinner and a show, and for the monster, they were an introduction to the minds of two human beings dancing atop a spectrum, and he seemed to love it. While the strife between Gregory and Darwin was everlasting, it took its first steps towards reconciliation on the fourth night. Gregory using his strands of knowledge and strands of heart to clean and dress the creature's wound before they had the chance to get any worse. And while it took some convincing, once we burned most of the infection away, the monster seemed to grow more lively, catching a bounty every day for us to gobble up. And while that small sliver of a week seemed to blaze by with the speed of a freight train, it didn't stop it from becoming one of the best times in my life. No longer surviving, but thriving with our booming sandbox. It came to the point where I even suggested us staying below the mountain, safe from the army that lived atop it. It was a notion supported by Darwin. Stay. Mountain not safe. Whenever the topic was brought up, despite our pleas, Gregory would never listen. The second our resources dry up, then we'd be no better than when we started. I don't want us to grow comfortable down here, Walter. We need to preserve our urgency. It's our fuel that'll help us rocket up the falls and into the promised land. Luckily, now that you're almost healed, we can stick to our timeline. On the 7th day, we'll rest, and on the 8th, we climb. He effused. Gregory maintained his triumphant conquer-the-world mantra, but even if his words were true, they didn't stop me from worrying. While our week may have been a vacation, that didn't stop the suicidal cloud from following me. Death was still lingering along the bladed face of the trek, and there was no doubt in my mind I wasn't ready to challenge it. Even after Gregory and I completed a practice run with surprising success atop a nearby hill, I remained gutted the night before our journey. The three of us left stewing by the fire as every hour dripped towards the inevitable. While all of us had grown close, none of us seemed able to admit to our troubles. Left to our own devices and suppressing our waves of emotion, virtues aside, all of us were stubborn to the core. Despite our shortcomings, Gregory impressively observed my anguish and leaped at the opportunity to correct it. You know, Walter, all our talk of faith not too long ago may have derailed the truth about my son, about his fate, he started. And that's because there's no need to tell me. Not if you don't want to, he interrupted. Oh, but I do. While it may have been tragic, it also taught me a valuable lesson, one that over the years has springboarded me through quite a few misfortunes. It taught me how to face them, how to stop them from debilitating me. All around us had grown quiet as Gregory began, minor embers flickering from the tips of the flames while Darwin slumbered into a deep sleep. The creature had agreed to join us on our conquest the day before, likely thinking we'd be doomed without guidance from our adventure guide. As Gregory continued, I was surprised to see that his face composed of dry eyes. Usually the minor mentions of his son drove him into hysterics, but this time was different. The man was operating with a purpose. No time left for grief. He divulged to me the tale of his son's almost death. A car crash that awoke in the night, one that destroyed Gregory's car, and eventually his entire family. I was the one behind the wheel. It was my fault, he would often repeat. He seemed oddly immune to that confession, as if he no longer felt its keen sting. Molly and I were terrified, convinced we'd lost our boy, our only boy who was unconscious in the front seat. I warned her, believe me, I did, not to touch him, to keep him as stable as possible before the medics arrived. She couldn't listen, though, a mother through and through. She couldn't just let her boy die, despite the dangers that came with touching him, he avowed. It was only until this moment that he seemed to appear choked up. She tried to lift him from the wreckage, and by doing so, she paralyzed him. She couldn't have known, though, that his neck had broken, but she moved him. And by doing so, his spine crumbled beyond recovery. In that moment, we lost our boy. And it was because of our foolish choices that it happened. The blood was on our hands, he admitted. We were left with a choice. Our child was trapped in a coma, a never-ending cell in which he never speak, move, or blink. To end his suffering or prolong it for the sheer novelty of life, a life that in my eyes was already over. For my wife, it was life that was worth keeping. It was a decision that drove us apart, and one that drove her away. She'd become blinded with grief, blinded by the idea that he'd one day wake up, perfect as ever, good as new, and that same bright, wide-eyed boy he'd become. Over time, she grew numb to it all, leaving us without a trace and allowing me to do what needed to be done. She'd have no part in it, though, in ending her own son's life. I understood. I'd felt the same pain she felt, the same sorrow that day by day grew the longer I kept my son for myself, hooked to a machine that prevented him from the afterlife. But I couldn't go through with it without her by my side. Mentally, I couldn't, he exclaimed. Gregory then did something that to this day I'll never forget. Through his tragedy, he smiled, beaming through his weathered eyes as he described his own son's last moments. The day before my son and I were scheduled to depart, I remember feeling just as you do now. Like my stomach was about to turn, that my mind was about to splinter, and that my life, as I knew it, would cease to be the same. And I was right. I never did what had to be done, but in my mind he was gone. I pretended as if his heart stopped beating and that his pain had faded away. By doing so, I felt a release, that I had made the right decision. I climbed grief and rose to the top of it a conqueror. All that waiting and toiling had driven me mad, but it all melted away, because despite probability, I at least tried. I tried to climb, and even though I was alone, I still found a way. Just like you will tomorrow. with me by your side, he simpered. Gregory once again failed to disappoint. While his stories were often trite, every once in a while, he'd strike me. He'd reveal truths people go their whole lives smothering. It awakened something in me, something I too had left hidden from the entire world. If Gregory was a man who valued these rare occurrences, then to gain his wholehearted trust, then I too had to do the same. I couldn't tell you why I mentioned it to him in the first place, though, as if exposing the truths about ourselves should be traded like currency. But I knew I'd never get another chance to tell him. It's rare the feeling ever bubbles to the surface, and so I wrote it. I revealed to him what I've told psychologists over 1,000 times. It was something I had memorized like a script from front to back. A truth I never really told anyone. I've never had anyone to tell. My mother and my doctors were all who needed to know. However, if I wanted Gregory to understand me, then I needed to remove my mask. Following several minutes of build-up and internal wrestling, I willingly shared any hope I had for normalcy. Something I have told myself to hate, and yet always seem to end up chasing. Gregory, I started, sinking into myself the second he glared happily into my eyes. So I was going to tell you this while we were under the hut, but I never got the chance. Before I start, keep in mind I turned out just fine. I'm healthy now, and there's nothing to feel sorry about or worry about, okay? I pleaded. The man leaned forward, looking intently and nodding after every sentence I spoke. So, my dad left me when I was 12. And after that, I sort of fell into a phase. I acted out in school. I couldn't hold on to my clusters of rage and was developing dark thoughts. I couldn't sleep or concentrate. I was in a bad place, you know? It's a very difficult thing to go through. Being abandoned like that, it's reprehensible. I know the feeling, the overwhelming tension, but it's only natural to break, he replied. It was an offer of solace, but not one I deserved. No, you don't understand. I ate nothing. I saw no one and never said a word. For weeks, I was falling apart, and my mom was too busy with her own issues to even realize it. She assumed I was the same withdrawn kid like I always was, and that I was alone, deserted. That is until I met a friend. It was somebody who genuinely talked, not just pretended like they were listening. Saved by someone who gave me advice when no one else would. A blessing. So many people fall victim to another's abandonment. They succumb to its familiarity and never realize just how important another person can be. No, you really don't understand, I emphasized. Gregory was becoming confused, luckily curious why I was swatting away every life preserver he offered. My new friend was a girl, my age. She played with me and kept me busy, innocent and kind at first, but as I told her my problems, she absorbed them. Over time, she would give me ideas about what to do and how to stop feeling sad all the time. She suggested these horrifying ideas, stuff no child should ever think of. He did his best, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We would play in my backyard all the time, staying out late at night, just talking. She always told me to run away, thinking it could make me happy. She was wrong, though. I told her that all the time. I was like her. She was always alone and afraid of her future, ignored by her parents. But then one day, she suggested an idea. Why don't we go to the roof to catch fireflies, she asked me. I was so young, I thought it was just a game. I rubbed my head as a thundering headache boiled under my skull. We climbed all the way to the roof, and she stopped me. I have an idea. Something that will stop the pain, the sadness. We can be happy again, she said. She then took my hand and looked into my eyes. Together, you and I. We can jump off this roof and transport into a different world, one where we won't be alone anymore. We can escape, she cried. I grimaced. Those exact words, Gregory, can you imagine that? A 12-year-old girl. I was scared and always angry, but I never wanted to hurt myself. It was never that bad. I'm sure of it. But she kept pleading and begging for me to jump with her. We even stood at the edge together, holding hands as we stared down at the gray pavement. I wouldn't do it though, Greg. That wasn't like me. That being said, when your only true friend is sobbing in front of you, hoping and wishing for something, how can you say no? Gregory covered his face with his hands and bellowed a troubled sigh. So you jumped. I'm so sorry, Walter, he exclaimed as his head shook in anguish. No. She pushed me, I admitted. I fell 2 stories and wound up breaking my neck on the concrete. I had to stay in the hospital for a long time. It took a while for my mind and body to clear up. Eventually I was fine, and after, I started doing much better. A girl that young? That's unbelievable, Walt. I can't even fathom someone doing that. It's insane. How could you be so cruel? I shook my head. He still didn't understand the painful truth. The reason for my countless sessions and pills I'd plunge down my throat every day. She didn't exist, Gregory. I hid my eyes from his face as I knew the look he'd give me. It would be the same look I was given so many times before. Annual checkups with my doctors, countless meetings with my shrinks, and even school teachers who always gave me that same dreaded look. Even my mother couldn't hide it from the horror. All the horror in her eyes. And after a while, neither could I. What do you mean? He asked in a genuine tone. Not in a manner that signaled worried. He seemed genuinely curious. They say I jumped. I remember differently. My doctors and I have concluded that she was a hallucination in my brain. A way to cope with my father leaving, somebody to take care of my mind while I floated in a state of flux. She protected me from desolation and gave me an out, something to numb the pain and a way to survive. It makes sense, I guess, and if everyone's saying it, then they can't be wrong, right? Did you believe them? He asked. It was a question I've always wanted to hear and was never given. I never did. She was real. Real as the dirt on this floor, that fire between us, and you and I in this cave right now. I can still remember her eyes, piercing pools of blue I'll never forget. My senses weren't playing tricks. She had to be real. I needed her to be real, because if she wasn't, then what did that say about me? I croaked. I finally looked up at Gregory's calm eyes, tranquil and steady, never wavering or judging. I couldn't believe the face that met mine. It was a sight that made my headache evaporate. I told that to my first therapist. No matter what he spewed at me, I held firm. It worried him and everyone around him, but fuck it, that was the truth. She helped me dearly, and they actively pushed her away. They took away what made me happy so I could become healthy, whatever that means. They put me in these special classes and gave me special treatments, but I saw through them. They were afraid of me. A boy they couldn't understand. But you said you were fine after the fall. You said you got better, Gregory interjected. That was the truth. After a while, I stopped telling them what I felt and told them what they wanted to hear. I said she was fake, an imaginary friend, basic kid stuff, and they bought it. Suddenly, I was making great strides and could be put back into normal society. My mom started smiling again, and the psychologist didn't talk to me anymore. That was more than enough reinforcement for a 12-year-old kid. But looking back, I wouldn't have made the same decision. She was part of me. I ripped it away. It was as if I actively rejected myself, crippling myself with dissonance, I exclaimed, battling an odd onslaught of emotions I rarely ever had the heart to face. Perhaps both of you were right. Maybe what's real to you can be fiction to somebody else. Who's to say one's opinion is better than another? If you are happy believing she was real, then do it. All the outside noise doesn't matter. You felt better, you fixed yourself. You should be proud of that fall. If I could heal from my son's death, I'd do anything necessary. Anything, he admitted. Gregory wasn't like most people. And in that one moment, I was grateful. No one had ever accepted me like that. It was a foreign feeling and something I held on to for as long as I could. "Thanks, Greg," I exclaimed, as I lied down on the floor preparing for the night. It wasn't nearly enough reward for the service he did for me, but it was all I had to offer. "I'm here whenever you want to talk, Walt. I've nothing else to do. Now get some sleep. We'll need tons of rest for tomorrow," he reminded me. A heavy weight tumbled off my back that night. Fortunate timing, as I needed as little weight as possible for the next day's hike. Tomorrow's daunting task faded in my mind as my eyes grew heavy. I was swirling with joy, but too worried to celebrate. Both feelings diffused the other, as what was once a treacherous trip transformed into the next footnote on our adventure. Food was a wonderful luxury my body needed to preserve. If I had to scale a tumultuous death trap for thousands of feet, then so be it. By the end of tomorrow, I would either be full on life or fall to my death. Surely, a day to remember.